From recruiting and consulting firm Riderflex, I'm your host, Steve Urban, and here is your Riderflex episode of the day. And on today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, we have my friend Jacob Crabtree. He's the co-founder and CEO at Columbia Hemp Trading Company, based in Oregon. How you doing, Jacob?
I'm good. Yourself?
Thank you so much, man. I love that view. You know, I was thinking, well, if you're in the car, it may not be good, but man, the lighting is great.
Beautiful Oregon day. When it's like this, it's hard to beat.
Plus, your audio is excellent. So thanks for pulling over and jumping on the Riderflex podcast.
Yeah, no worries.
Fascinating story. I think the listeners are going to enjoy hearing, the Jacob timeline and how you decided to go into cannabis and hemp. I'm so glad that you took the time. So before we get into Columbia Hemp, tell us the Jacob story. Like, where's he from? You know, where did he go to school? A little bit about his family. Give us some personal stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm, one of the few kind of born and raised Oregonians here, actually. So I grew up in a small farming town just outside of Portland. And, my whole family's been in Oregon for a long time and went to school here, went to University of Oregon, went down a path of more of a medical career. Human physiology, really the body and all the science behind it really interested me at that time. And business was, I don't know, maybe boring to me at that time. And so I started in a kind of finance direction. I ended up more science side, and it was always my intention to come out and do physical therapy and things like that. But kind of got drawn into small business and entrepreneurship really shortly after college.
Where'd you get that bug? Did that come from one of your parents, or where'd you get that entrepreneurial bug?
My dad's owned like a lumber broking business since I was a kid. I'm not sure that was kind of what rubbed off on me. For me, I came out of college and needed a couple bucks. So I was helping some friends who just owned a gymnastics facility of all things. And that led into pretty quickly me jumping in on other projects while I was kind of getting ready to go back to school. 6 months or maybe taking on really an ownership role with that. Stayed there for 6 years. And at that time really started to get business and coaching advice from, a previous manager at Intel, and he was a really good guide for me to start understanding, how do you manage a business and how do you manage people? And that was really the start of my, I guess, small business career. And from there, jumped into real estate, a few other smaller projects, some successes, some failures, which is to be expected. And completely by chance ran into an old college friend who, had just started a cannabis company, and I knew nothing about it.
Now, what year was this?
This was 2016.
2016. And who were you working for at that moment? Who were you working for?
I was doing real estate at that time. So a little independent, commercial real estate, and, just kind of getting off the ground there. So I had some work to do. And
now your dad didn't say, hey, come help me with my company. You didn't have that pull?
No. I mean, I think that could have been a direction, but I never had that interest.
Never had that interest. Okay. All right.
I'm probably a little too, bullheaded or opinionated for that kind of thing. So, I'm like, the kind of mind is like, I'll just do it on my own. And
okay. So, now, all right. Now, were you making a good living in your real estate stuff at that time? You were doing fine. Everything's going great. And you just happened to meet this friend that's in cannabis?
I wouldn't say I was young still at that point, and I wouldn't say I was making a good living, but I was certainly getting by. And the gymnastics facility, that was a really good learning experience for me. But a lot of these businesses that I had been involved in were kind of low margin businesses, and so we were there as owners, just trying to crack through and make it, and make it big. But to be, as I look back 10 years ago, it's very, my understanding of business and what was possible is pretty narrow.
Now,
Uh,
and how did you see yourself at this time when you met this friend? Before we get into that conversation,
yeah,
did you see yourself as an operations guy, a sales guy, an overall kind of bit? I mean, how did you bucket yourself at that point?
yeah, very much operational.
Okay,
Um,
okay,
I think like a natural role for me is more as a like COO
okay.
type role.
Keep the train on time, get everybody to play nice together in the sandbox, make sure project management's going well. I mean, you were just naturally gifted at that kind of stuff.
I think for me, I'm a fairly even keel, kind of, even tempered person. And so people management comes pretty naturally to me.
Okay,
Where I've grown a lot, with the help of like my current COO has been on the more financial side.
okay, great.
Um, but yeah, I have very much an operational mindset. I kind of try and think, step one, step two, step three. And
Yep.
as I was getting into the cannabis side, they tried to stick me into a sales role, funny enough. And that's, I'm not good at it. And
Gotcha. So you met this friend. You're at like a one of those cool Oregon bars one night, and he walks in. And he's like, "Hey, man, I'm starting a cannabis company. Why don't you come over here? Walk us through that."
I mean, almost exactly that is I was walking down the street. It was, I want to say February. It's pretty cold out, and there was an outdoor brew fest going on just in
Okay.
downtown Portland. And I ran into him, and he goes, "Hey, a friend of his and himself were starting this vaporizer company. Here's a vaporizer, like
And
check it out."
and like hands it to you, and you're like,
And he
"Okay."
hands it to me. He's this little kit, and I'm like, I don't know what this is, but cool. Like I'll take it. I'm having a drink. I'll smoke that. And they said they needed help. And what was I doing at that time? And I was still kind of onboarding into the real estate. So I said, I have some time to help operationally and let me see
Okay.
what I can do. That company was Select Strains, if you know that. And
Okay.
it turned out to be, I would say, probably the premier vaporizer company in the industry. And
Great.
it was a
Well,
wild 6 months of I've been getting into dispensaries as the Oregon market was transitioning from a medical to a recreational state.
okay.
And 6 months later, that got acquired by Kira, a now bigger cannabis company, and we kind of merged those together, and that was really the ride of that. I didn't stay much longer after that, but it was a really fascinating first look into the industry.
Well, now what did your folks say? What did your parents say when you said, "Hey, I'm going to work in the cannabis industry"?
Uh, to be completely honest, I
They
told
don't.
them I was
They still. You. Oh, I was gonna say they still don't know. No.
it took a while and they have no issues with it. Like they're great people, and not judging my choices. But I told them I was working in the medical field. It was wasn't it was a
uh,
white lie.
that's that's pretty
so
good.
so I told them
Uh,
that for a while until we started to see some success.
right.
And then we started getting some publicity, and then at that point it was like the stigma's fallen away pretty quick on this, and it's
Right.
legitimized, and it's something that I was comfortable kind of sharing with my family.
Okay. Although I will say in 2016, I mean, just in the 3 years, it's gotten a lot more. People have gotten a lot more comfortable putting it on their LinkedIn and putting it on their resume. I mean, 3 years ago, even people were still trying to hide.
Yeah, yeah. And there's still a bit of that, but I think, and especially with hemp now being federally legal,
Right.
it's completely legitimized it. And I think, as a team here, not jumping too far ahead, we've tried to really bring industry professionals out from
Right. Yep.
translatable industries
Yep.
that give us even more legitimacy. And so that's something that we're pretty prudent on, of just building a team that has been there and done that.
It definitely has changed. In fact, at Riderflex, I mean, the last several executives we've placed have been from Mobil, Exxon, Coca-Cola, a bunch of others, major brand names. So yeah, that whole stigma and being worried about that, yeah, that's almost over.
Mhm.
because everybody's jumping in. So this company, you go to work for this company with your friends, it gets acquired, and then all of a sudden you find yourself out of a job and looking for next, or you made a little money on that when that got acquired and you took a little time off. What happened there in your life? Talk to us
Um,
about that.
Made enough to kind of keep going for a while, but it was right at that time. One of the other founders and I kind of split off to go work in private equity.
Okay.
And that's where you and I first got introduced,
Yep. Yep.
as I was building out that sales team. And so I was tasked with supporting operations of investments that they were making,
Okay.
and working at the kind of company level as they were
Mm-hmm.
doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that took on a variety of roles, primarily in kind of a sales and branded portfolio company. But they had made investments into manufacturing, CO2 extraction machines, cultivation. They
Mm-hmm.
were even doing steel production outside of the States. And so that gave me even more well-rounded look into the industry.
Gotcha.
Had the vaporizer side, and now building on that, seeing it from both kind of the private equity side, which is really interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
also deploying those into operations was more in my wheelhouse. And
Yep.
that ultimately, 3 years later, led me to co-packing, as they made an investment into a co-packer, and that just completely intrigued me, more on the food and beverage manufacturing side. So I jumped on board as director of operations, director of sales and operations for a company called Gesundheit Foods, and stayed there for about 2 years as that went from a completely brand new company. We were just opening our doors to really a state of the art facility.
Mm-hmm.
It was doing manufacturing of cannabis products, marijuana products. Um, Helped build out, I wasn't too much on the build out side, but operationally, facilities in Washington, the Oregon one was in place, and down in California.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was looking at Columbia Hemp, they were going through their Series A, but that ultimately ended up in acquisition by Acreage Holdings.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, the common thread here is I tend to get out right as the good thing.
But during this time, not only are you honing your executive level operational skills, but just the startup experience, everything about working in a startup and everything about working in a hemp or cannabis company. I mean, just tons of experience and value that's happening over this period. And
Hmm.
and then what happens? Do you meet the your co-founder partner for Columbia Hemp? How do you know that person already? How were you connected?
Yeah, it's a small industry, and um,
Yep.
Oregon's even smaller, and so we had ran into each other a few times. But he came by one day, and we were talking, and he kind of shared this idea that he had of creating a physical marketplace for hemp. Um,
Okay.
and he's truly, a visionary, and that's really his role in our company as well. Um, but he came with an idea, and we kind of talked about the pitfalls of the industry in the previous year, the hemp industry, and
Hmm.
how we saw farmers, leaving product in the field because there's no infrastructure for them to go and stabilize their crop.
Hmm.
And I really listened to it, and the initial intent from my lens was, okay, let's create a funnel to build feedstock so I can put that into the co-packer, and we can have unlimited supply of CBD
Hmm.
while we work in the adult use markets on the THC products. And so the whole idea was to always tie it together with a co-packer.
Okay.
And so, he came to me, he said, I want you to be CEO there, and let's start this thing. And we did months and months of budgeting and performance and planning to try and get this off the ground.
And you and him are going to bootstrap this thing, or you immediately went
Yeah,
out for? Okay, so you
no.
bootstrapped it personally. All right.
Well, we bootstrapped it, and we had somebody that was committed to bring money in, but really at the 11th hour there, the money was no longer there, so it
Ooh.
was
Ooh.
required to bootstrap it, and you know have vendors finance us, even though that wasn't the intention. But it wasn't our intention. It was just we had to get going, and we had a great product market fit as a company. And
So let me just take a pause right there for the listeners. So in other
yeah,
words, you had vendors able to do some work for you, and you were hoping you couldn't pay them. You had to. There's a bridge there.
yeah, there's a bridge there. Best intentions sometimes don't work out that way, and it was a rough, rocky start. But we're primarily a drying facility, and so we decided to start designing dryers back in, I want to say, maybe April of 2018. And so
Okay.
we were designing these dryers and starting to build them in July to have them on site in September. And all the while we're putting together our funding and that commitment's there, and then kind of fell through at the end. So what we had to do is just start the operation, bring in the revenue to pay these off as quick as possible. And fortunately, we had great partners there that understood where we're at. And
were there some sleepless nights there during those months?
I mean, there's still sleepless nights. It's but the second we opened our doors and you saw 25 farmers lining up to have their product dried, and you see 10, 20 semi trucks coming in and out every day, that you have something that is useful and is profitable. And
so the demand was there. You knew that if you could just get operations set up and get the equipment you needed, you knew you would have the clients if you could just get started.
The belief was that, yeah, but we were trying out new equipment that we just designed, so there was no guarantee that all that was going to work, but we went to the right people to get it done. And it was very quickly understood that it was a huge need, and we kind of had placed ourselves right in the center of the Willamette Valley, so we were in a good spot for where all the growing was happening. And it just, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time.
So for the listeners, a kind of a layman's term overview. So Columbia Hemp Trading Company basically is a processing center. How would you describe it in a couple of sentences, basically?
Well, it's a physical marketplace for hemp.
Okay.
And we primarily aggregate local Oregon farmers.
Okay.
We support them by contracting out harvesting if they need it, and transportation, bringing that to our facility, drying the biomass to stabilize it. So we get it to, a 10% moisture content to stabilize it.
Mm-hmm.
And then some farmers elect to keep that product with us, and we densify that into a crude oil, and we sell it for them. And we do that on splits. And so we're a service provider primarily, but as we look into the future, we're really looking at, how do we build an agronomy program to get more stable inputs into our systems, and how do we continue to go down the road of refinement and formulations.
Now, you said there was a line of farmers at first, and I'm visualizing that. So does that mean there was a bunch of folks up there growing hemp, but there was nobody to process it for them? There's no facilities in place to process it, or not enough?
To dry primarily, yeah.
To dry.
And so at a small acreage, let's say up to 10 acres, you can hang that in a barn and it's going to dry really nicely over 2 weeks.
Okay.
But as you scale, that is no longer an option for you. And so if you're doing 25, 50, 100 acres, you really need to find a more industrious kind of process. And that's what we provided.
Are there any farmers growing tens of thousands of acres yet, or it's still a hand crop and that's not possible?
The largest single planting I've heard of was about 4,000 acres this year, which is pretty big. I'd say the biggest farmers we worked with, we did a little contract farming that was about 200 acres, and we have a couple of customers that were in that 500 to 700 acre range.
Okay.
But still we're seeing, I would say on average, 30 to maybe 60 acres
And why is that? Why don't you drive down the highway right now and see 1,000 acres of hemp like you do corn? Why hasn't that happened yet?
Well, it's expensive for one to get into. You're still
Okay.
a buck a seed to plant,
Mm,
and you're planting, maybe 2,000 plants of seed. So your cost per acre for your inputs is $4 or $5,000, and that's a very big cost. And
I see.
again, the trade financing's not there, but also it's such a new industry. We haven't quite figured out how to do it perfectly yet, and it's going to
Okay.
take some time. The harvesting's not there. All the there's still a lot of debate on what's the best way to grow it and what's the right spacing and all these different factors. And I'll be honest, it's a challenging plant. It provides all the challenges you get from maybe corn and wheat and all these different ag products. Put all those challenges and put them together, and that's cannabis.
Now, is it true when I say hand crop? I think I heard that term from somebody. So you can't harvest it with big machines and things like that, right? Is that correct?
Uh, no, we absolutely do mechanical harvesting.
You do. Okay. I
Yeah,
didn't know. I didn't know if it was at that point. For the
yeah.
listeners. Okay. So you can. All right. And then what about, can you educate the listeners on this too? I find this fascinating. Isn't there a major problem with the male plants, impregnating the female plants, so to speak, and messing up an entire crop? How does that work? Can you just give a little overview there?
Yeah, and I'm probably, I don't want to get over my skis here. I'm not
Right. Yeah, me
the
either.
best to explain it, but you know, cannabis is interesting in that you have male and female plants, and what we are primarily planting in the field is feminized seeds.
Okay.
Um, what you tend so, and when you plant that, you're about 1 in 4,000 seeds will pop male. And so you actually have to get out into the field and you have to go hunt those males.
Like physically, like a guy walking around.
Absolutely. They make drones for it now, but yeah,
Okay.
you're getting
Okay.
out there, looking at, and you got
Wow.
to yank that out of the field because it will, you know, start to kind of make your female plants hermaphrodite, right? And so they'll
Wow.
start to have seeds
Mm,
and they'll lower their production.
mm.
But it was actually found, they did some experiments with, there's a really good Netflix show on this that kind of simplifies it. But they did some trials a long time ago and they separated the plants. And when they separate them, you saw the female plants just continue to produce flowers
Mm.
to try and attract the males.
Oh, I see.
And so that, but once they get pollinated, they stop producing the flower.
Okay.
So what you're trying to do is create a separate environment for them, get the males out of there. And
Mhm.
that comes down to, your genetic selection, making sure you're going with a trusted seed provider,
Okay.
and then making sure you're getting out into the field and removing the males.
Now I'm having this visual. I'm visualizing a drone flying around and like it dives down with a little a cutter device, a cutting device or something, and like slicing them. How does that work?
Oh, no. I think it just kind of points and says, we've identified seeds on this plant.
I
Now
see.
go walk your fields and find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, that sounds expensive from a payroll perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, yeah, I'm starting to understand now why there aren't massive fields everywhere of hemp yet.
It'll
Okay.
get that way. I think as, just last week we had the USDA come out with the rules and regulations, and that's providing a framework for people to start planning to or
Mm,
against. And
mm, mm.
pretty soon you're going to really see some of the bigger guys getting into it, that kind of dip their toe into it, but you'll see it.
I will tell you, I live in a little farm town, basically here in Colorado.
Mhm.
I live in between Fort Collins and Denver in a little town called Johnstown, and down at the local tavern where I happen to go every once in a while, I'll uh, I'll see some of the local farmers, and I flat out asked one of the guys the other day. I said, "Well, how come you're not, planting hemp? Why aren't you trying hemp?" And he said what you spoke to earlier. He said, "Hey man," he's like, "I got friends that they can't find a place to process it. They planted a bunch. They didn't know where to take it. Couldn't get it anywhere. Blah blah blah." And so,
Yeah.
So, and by the way, so why aren't there more facilities like yours? Like, why hasn't, I don't know, why aren't there a bunch of these places like Columbia
You're
Hemp?
starting to see them pop up, and I've visited a couple in Colorado actually,
Okay.
but it's just such a nascent industry still. It's just we need time to develop these things. We saw a few people, more kind of competitors trying to get up and running this year, and
Uh-huh.
I very much take the position of, you know, sharing resources to help people get up and going, because as an industry, we need to collaborate to find the best solutions right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my company, I have 2 facilities in Oregon. We maybe helped 3 to 5% of the Oregon market.
Wow. Okay.
We brought in, probably 2,000 acres. And
Right.
so even if 10 of me popped up in Oregon,
Yeah.
there's still plenty of work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think there might be some farmers that don't make it to next year, unfortunately, but the demand for drying and harvesting and storage is still going to be there.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Did you risk everything personally when you bootstrapped this, or how far out did you extend yourself? Was it like chips all in the middle of the table, or what?
I mean, what other way is there to live,
Right. I mean, do you have family at home depending on you to bring home?
No, no,
Okay.
I'm fortunate in that regard.
Okay. All
Just
right.
me, but
So
you know,
if you starve, you're just starving yourself. It's okay.
right, right, yeah. No, it's I like, again, I'm a glutton for punishment, and so. But when I got into this, I had a pretty good job, well-paying job, and the idea was to do both.
Ah.
Run this, to manage the other one, and then merge them in.
Mm.
But it was, as any true startup is, 6 months without pay and
Yep.
just trying to make it through, and came out the other side. So that's good.
What advice would you give people that want to get into cannabis? Executives, let's just use, I don't know. Let's say there's an executive who works for, I don't know, Home Depot or Pepsi or whatever. I don't know. They think they want to get into cannabis, and they're at a VP level maybe or up. What advice would you give those folks?
Oh, good question. Um, hmm. I mean, definitely do your homework, you know. I think that's the first thing, is understand the industry, understand where you fit into the industry. I think there's a lot of companies out there, and we're kind of see a trend of, the people that are telling the story, and they're big and they're loud, but they may not be managed
Mm-hmm.
really properly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an executive coming from a seasoned company like Pepsi or Home Depot, you're used to pretty regimented,
Right.
meetings and
Right.
financial reporting and all these things. And you have to understand that this is a really new industry, with a lot of young operators. Some are seasoned, but some are young. And so you should do your homework to understand the environment you're putting yourself in. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no surprises there. And we've kind of taken the approach I mentioned earlier of finding those translatable industries, whether it be biofuels or organic foods, finding people that have been executives in those companies
Yep.
to help us bring structure and organization to our company. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're trying to be, smarter, and you see that with the big firms out there. But I think it would be an oversight to think that every cannabis company out there is ran in the most, structured way, because they're all new.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. And not to, for the listeners, not a slam on the industry overall or anything like that. But the reality is there are a lot of outfits that, yeah, they're not ran very well, and you got to be careful. You got to make sure you really do your homework, understand who you're going to work for, find out as much as you can before you sign up. I mean, that goes for any industry really, but cannabis even more so from what I've seen. With that said, there are some outstanding operators out there, and to your point, more and more executives coming into the industry, from outside the industry every day, and it's getting stronger and stronger. What's harder for you? Are people the hardest thing, or regulations tougher, if you had to rank the two, being in the industry?
People, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
My leadership team, I think we have about 30 plus years of combined regulatory cannabis experience, which is a lot,
Mm-hmm.
being that it's only 5, 6 years old. And it's certainly easier on the hemp side, with it being federally legal. But the most difficult part right now is there's so much uncertainty on like supply contracts and available product and even the figures to tell you where the industry's currently at.
Mm-hmm.
um, that it's really difficult to kind of get the big deals done right now, and work with everybody and try and come to structured agreements. You're creating all this stuff from scratch. It's the management's definitely the more difficult part.
When Jacob is interviewing somebody, what's he looking for? What kind of character traits or personality is he looking for to make sure that somebody's going to fit into Columbia Hemp Trading Company's culture?
Yeah, I look over to my HR partner and make sure she's smiling and he likes them. But no, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's all about culture for me. I think we've built something
Yeah.
where we have employees, and operators that are just, you know, they'll do anything to kind of make sure this thing keeps going, and we
Mm.
challenge them and they always respond in a positive manner. And so we want to make sure as we bring people in, especially on the executive level, that they share in kind of our ethos of where this can go, and that they help us continue to build the culture in a positive manner and don't come in with trying to be a hammer. And
Mm.
that's the biggest thing that I look for. We're at a point now where really the hirings that I'm involved with are at the manager level. And so it's very much, it's very important to me that they're instilling their past experience, but also sharing in the culture, because we believe the plant has a ton to offer the industry, but we got to do it responsibly.
If you needed to hire a VP of sales and you had two people in front of you with similar resumes, would you take the person that worked for Coca-Cola and no cannabis experience, or would you take the person that had cannabis experience and had worked for smaller startups? Which one would you take if the resumes were even and they both matched the culture the same?
It's a great question. My current VP of sales has a bit of bridge between the both, so it's a hard one.
It's nice if they do, right? I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
if they have startup experience and they worked for Coca-Cola and they had worked for a cannabis outfit
yeah,
before, I mean, boom, there you
yes.
go.
No, he's amazing in that regard. Where we're at as a company today, I would probably take, the person that's been at scale.
Okay.
What we find sometimes difficult is taking those that haven't seen operations at scale
Mm-hmm.
and trying to open, their mind to,
Yeah.
no, here's the way it needs to be put into place.
Mm-hmm.
A really good approach of ours is finding those, seasoned professionals that have been there and done that, and then teaching them the cannabis side.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's in our wheelhouse to do, because as operators and owners, we haven't always seen things at scale. We need outsiders to show us that pathway.
If you
And so
can, if you can keep those people, if you can keep their head from popping off the first 6 months they're in it, right? Like we put we put an executive from a big time oil company into a cannabis outfit, and as hard as I tried to tell him what he was walking into, as much as I tried to explain it, 45 days in, he's calling me on the way home, going, "What the hell did I sign up
right.
for?"
Well, and that's where transparency comes into play,
Right?
and ensure
Yes.
that you're doing a decent courting period, and you're bringing them
Yes.
on and involving them in your management meetings and opening the door, because you know you don't want someone to come in and then be disruptive, and not be happy there. That's
Right.
not good for anybody.
Right.
So.
Right. So let me ask you this, Jacob, you still can, and you could have just went to work for a VC or a PE firm and been one of those operational guys that goes into a company they just funded and stand it up, or maybe turn it around if it was the PE firm. Like, you could still do that for a living right now. You could do that and just be a hired gun to work for a PE firm. And,
Yeah.
And by the way, probably make a hell of a lot more money than you're currently making.
Probably. Yeah.
Why not do that? That's a much safer job, right? Why not just do that?
Yeah.
Why risk everything doing what you're doing?
I think I get excited by the potential of what you can build, on one hand, and then the other hand is I'm not the best employee.
Why do you say that?
Uh, you know, stuck in my ways in a lot of regards, and opinionated, and I like to do things my way, and my other owners are very much the same way, but we collaborate well. And for me, is I've always kind of not always taken the path of least resistance. It's what's challenging and what's hard, and let's go after that.
Yeah. You come across as a very reserved, stable, like a very stable guy. Like, hey, I'm right here. I'm on cruise control. But deep down, you like living on the edge a little bit. I think you get the rush from that. Am I wrong?
No, it's a very good characterization. I like kind of getting knocked down a little bit, puts a chip on my shoulder, and that helps us drive forward. And when your back's against the wall, I think you make probably your best decisions. And so
that's great. That's great. Well, I'm super happy for you. I know we've known each other for a while now, and I know some of those moves you went through. I really admire the risks that you've taken. I mean, not a lot of people have the guts to do it, my friend. And so
I appreciate it. It's a wild ride, but it's, if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably doing something very similar, in another industry, taking the chance and
yep,
seeing what I can make for myself. So, but
last question. What's Jacob's core purpose in life? If you had to put it in a sentence or two, kind of a deep question, but if you really had to if you think about, so every once in a while you wake up and you go, okay, what am I doing here on this planet? What's my real purpose in life? What's Jacob's?
It is deep. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I'm getting older, and yep. What is my ethos and what's important to me? I think for the most thing the thing that kind of drives me right now is finding a way to support my family, not my kids or wife or anything, but my sisters and my parents, and making sure that, if they need be, there's support there. That's more important to me than anything. And then beyond that, I would say that's it. That's the core thing for me.
So if you were able to build this thing up and sell it, or, whatever, someday, and walk away with a nice chunk of change, if you could go over and, I don't know, buy your folks a nice farm out in Oregon somewhere and hand it to your parents, like, that would be huge for you.
Yeah. And they do just fine by themselves, but I want to make sure that, my sister and her kids and their families are, don't have to stress about kind of the, everything in life. And I'm a ways from that for sure. But, I think it's within my capacity to get done. And I like the pain. And I think, even if this is successful, I'll probably dive right back into the next startup and treat it that way. But, for me, that's always been kind of a driving factor. So
I love it, man. I admire what you're doing and respect it for sure. And I'm happy for you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being on the Riderflex podcast. Let's stay in touch. I appreciate great advice, by the way, and really cool story for the listeners. So
appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And let's connect soon. If you're in Denver or anywhere in Colorado, call me. Let's connect.
Will do.
All right, buddy. Take care. Bye-bye. The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.